Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and welcome back to another video. So as you can see, this is another vlog. So here in the US it is Labor Day weekend right now. It's about 3:30 on Friday afternoon. Got home from work about 30 minutes ago. So I have a 3-day weekend plus kind of the rest of the afternoon. So I thought it would be kind of fun, especially because I'm reading a lot of books right now, to do a kind of 24-hour readathon, see how much I can read over the course of the weekend. I'm currently reading 8 books and would love to finish as many of those books as possible, which I think is pretty manageable as I'm pretty far along in most of them. But we'll just kind of see where this weekend takes us. I really don't have that many plans this weekend. I'm doing a couple like virtual hangouts, I think, with some friends, but other than that I really have nothing going on. So love that for me, but I just kind of wanted to start off this vlog. As I said, it's about 3:30. I was just working on doing like my budgeting for this kind of pay period because today was payday, which was really exciting. Speaking of, if any of you are looking, this is totally random, if any of you are looking for a like good budgeting worksheet, I've been using You Need a Budget. I love their service. You do have to pay for it, which I do not pay for. I just use all of their kind of free materials, which they have a ton of free materials on their website. And then if you're at all like Excel savvy, you can pretty much copy their software, which you can see in a lot of like YouTube videos and like tutorial videos, and create an Excel spreadsheet that basically does the same thing, and then you can utilize their kind of 4-rule philosophy in your kind of spending habits. And it has helped me quite a lot. It helped me a lot when I was working in retail and just like didn't have that much money, but was trying to also save some money for like moving and stuff, which obviously didn't end up happening, but it was helpful for kind of thinking of like every dollar being a dollar that you need to think about. And if you want to save money, you need to kind of allocate that money ahead of time before like realizing you've spent it and then you are not saving any money, which kind of happens to a lot of people. So would recommend You Need a Budget if you are looking for a budgeting app. This is not paid by sponsored or anything. I just really like their service and want to share it with other people. So that is kind of what's on my agenda for right now, but I think I'll be listening to my audiobook while I do that. But also I didn't even tell you what books I'm reading right now. So let's do that first. So, okay, I'm reading, as I said, 8 books right now. There are 2 that I think I've talked about in my last 2 vlogs as like long-term projects that I am still reading. I will definitely be reading from both of these during this weekend. Actually, one of them, which I'll talk about in just a second, I do kind of need to make some progress on because I've not read it in several weeks now. But the first of which is New Daughters of Africa, edited by Margaret. Busby. I'm about like a little more than a third of the way through this one. Really enjoying it. I read like 1 entry of this each night before I go to sleep, and the other of which is The Fragile Earth, writings from the New Yorker on climate change, and I'm about 20% of the way through, but this one comes out in a little over a month and it is almost 600 pages, as I've said previously in some other vlogs, so I do need to make some progress on this one. Hopefully read like 3 or 4 more of the selections in this one over this weekend. And then since we're talking about ebooks, I will just mention the other ebooks that I have on the go, both of which are ARCs, one of which has already come out. The first of which is The Great Offshore Grounds by Vanessa Veselka. I'm about 40-ish% of the way through this one. I've been reading it for a long time, like several weeks now, and I have thought several times about DNFing it, and I've not read from this one in several days now, so I might officially DNF it this weekend or try to finish it because I just don't want to be reading it anymore. So either way, I'll probably have some final thoughts for you on The Great Offshore Grounds. The next arc that I have is Master of Poisons by Andrea Hairston. This one comes out this coming Tuesday, so the 8th of September, and is a fantasy novel that is inspired by like African folklore. I talked about this one a bit in my September TBR talk, which I'll put a link to up in the cards above, and I'm kind of just really confused. I think the plot has finally started happening. I'm about 15-ish% of the way through this one, and so I think I will start to understand more of what's going on, but you really get like dropped right into the world in this one, which sometimes I struggle with fantasy. I'm very much a like kind of world building and character driven fantasy reader, and the plots of fantasy books often I could really take or leave them, and this one is very plot focused and just has a lot of characters, and none of them are different from any of the other characters, so I don't know what's going on, but I am reading this one and I will keep you updated on that. And then I also am listening to The Fascinators by Andrea Eliopulos. I'm about halfway through this one, and I have like 4 hours left, I think, of the audiobook, which I'm listening at like 1.75 times speed. So I think I will definitely get this one finished this weekend. In fact, I'll actually be listening to it as soon as I stop talking to you and start working on my little budgeting spreadsheet again. So that one I'm enjoying. It's pretty meh. It's almost definitely gonna be a 3-star read, which is, it's rated relatively low on Goodreads in terms of its average rating, and I think that's just because every person rated this 3 stars because it just is not interesting enough to warrant a better or worse rating than that. So that's exciting. So then I also do have 3 books that I'm reading physically, the first of which I'm not enjoying very much, but was lended to me from a friend, and then a second friend has also read it and really enjoyed it. And since they know that I love to read, they were like, Jenny, you need to read this. And as I said, I'm not really enjoying it. But this is Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark, who are the co-hosts of My Favorite Murder, which is not a podcast that I listen to, but they said that this is a really great book in terms of like the kind of discussion about like feminism and femininity and stuff. But I just am finding this to be not interesting. I think of it kind of as a bad version of Big Friendship, which I read last month, or no, 2 months ago now, and really, really loved. But this, yeah, I just don't really relate to them as people. I had a very different childhood than they did. I think both of them went through a lot of like really intense stuff during their childhood, but also both are from kind of families that it sounds like have a fair amount of wealth. So I don't know, they just kind of sound like they went like rich girls that went to the bad side for a little while and now are kind of dealing with those repercussions, or dealt with those repercussions in their young adulthood. So yeah, I mean, I personally, my childhood experience, like I was way too, I mean, obviously I have a booktube channel, like I'm a very nerdy person, so like I'm just way too nerdy and too much of like a good child to have like related at all to anything that they're discussing in here. So it just doesn't really feel applicable to me in terms of the self-help parts, and then their memoir is just like not very well written. So that's my pretty negative review of this one so far, but I'm also about halfway through it, and I do want to read it since my friends lent it to me, but I'm not really having fun. So then there's another one that I'm also not really having very much fun with, which is The Sellout by Beatty, which is my book club pick for my virtual book club that I do with 2 of my best friends from college. And if I was reading this book without my book club, I would have DNF'd it because I'm hating it. It's awful. Like this is not the type of book that I like. I kind of knew that going into it, and it will probably be like a 1-star book. I just really am not enjoying it. There was an extended like series of scenes about the kind of narrator of this book and the psychological experiments that his dad did on him, as like his dad's a psychologist and he has all like an academic psychologist and he has all these ideas about psychology and the Black experience. He's like abusing his child on the page, and I'm like, I do not, like, I understand children get abused, I do not want to read about that in a book, and it happened in this book. So really was not a fan of that. Also, I just don't get it. Like, I'm not smart enough for this book, not enjoying it, but we're meeting sometime this week, so I need to keep reading it. I'm about 60-ish pages through it, and there's about 280 pages. I'm about like only 15% of the way through this one, so I need to power through this one at some point during this weekend. And then the last book that I'm the furthest along in, I only have about 100 pages left, is A Place for Us by Fatima, Farheen and Mirza, and unfortunately I'm not loving this one, I think, as much as everyone else does. Granted, I have not gotten to the father's part, which is the last section, and that's what I think a lot of people say really like make this book for them so good. And I do really like her writing style quite a lot. I just am not in love as much with the kind of explorations of family in here. I think there's a lot of like selfishness that's being presented as selflessness in this book, which I don't really appreciate, and also a lot of characters who need to forgive other characters, and that's not happening. So the fact that this, on the kind of cover by NPR, it says that it's a stunning novel about love, compassion, cruelty, and forgiveness, I would agree it's about love, compassion, cruelty, but the forgiveness part, for me at least, has not really happened. So I'm hoping that'll happen in this last 100 pages, but we'll let you know. So those are the 8 books that I'm currently reading right now and will be reading throughout this vlog. And I think that's everything for right now. Hi friends, it is Saturday morning. It's about 11:45 right now. Just got back from the farmer's market, which was so fun. It's definitely fall vegetables here in Atlanta, even though it's still like 85 degrees. So we saw some like butternut squash and acorn squash, and my mom and I thought that was fun, but too hot to eat acorn squash at this time. But we're gonna do at some point this weekend one of our favorite recipes that's from the New York Times cooking, that is roasted eggplant and green beans and burrata cheese, and it is absolutely delicious, a perfect summer dish. So we got all the ingredients for that. But I wanted to check in again this morning because I didn't check in at all the rest of yesterday, and I'm pretty sure I've not watched back the clip from yesterday, but I'm pretty sure it's probably fairly incoherent because I was very tired because it was the end of a long work week. So I'm not sure how much of a description I gave on any of the books that I am reading right now. So I will try to kind of update you as I go along and as I'm reading them throughout the rest of this weekend, so you are aware of what they are. And I definitely, any of the books that I finish this weekend, I will definitely update and review during this vlog. So I'm gonna continue to kind of read right now. As I said, it's 11:45. I don't really have any plans today. I might be going to Target later because we need another bike helmet. We were hoping to bike to the farmer's market, and then we realized we only have one helmet and there's two of us. So that was fun. So we need to go to Target and get a bike helmet at some point, either today or tomorrow. Also need to go to Trader Joe's to get some of our staples that we like to get there because we're out. And yeah, so I'll just be reading for the next couple hours, but I wanted to kind of update you. My plans for the day in terms of reading include finishing A Place for Us by Fatima, Farheen, and Mirza. I have, let's see, about 70, 60 pages left of this one, and I remember yesterday I was saying that I didn't particularly love this one as much as I think other people have so far, but I hadn't got to the father's perspective, and that seems to be what kind of makes it for people. And I definitely am feeling, even in the like 30 pages I've read since I last updated, that I am seeing more of kind of what people like about this book in terms of the kind of reflective aspects that I was looking for that I felt were kind of lacking during the majority of the book. So I am enjoying this one. I will read these next 60 pages probably right now and kind of wrap it up in a little bit. But then also today I am hoping to maybe finish Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark, which, as I talked about in yesterday's clip, I am not really enjoying this one. It was gifted to me, or like borrowed. I'm borrowing it from a friend who another friend also borrowed it from, so we're kind of having a little book club about it, and they both really loved it. But it's just not really, memoirs are not really my thing unless they are kind of really, I don't even know what I like in memoirs, but whatever this is, it's not what I like in memoirs. And also I'm not a fan of the podcast, so I just am not really getting on with this one. But I'm a little over halfway done and it reads pretty quickly, so I'm hoping to make a good chunk of progress in this one. And then I'm also hoping to make some good progress with The Sellout by Beatty, which I was actually telling my parents about this morning because I just, as I said yesterday, I'm really not enjoying this one. And my dad basically summed it up that like I don't like satire, which this is a satire. And it was also written in 2015, or published in 2015. So it's published in like a pre-Trump America, which I think is a very, when talking about race in America, is a very important distinction of like talking about basically the existence of racism in America. Because I think in 2008 to 2015, during, or 2016, I guess, during Obama's presidency, there was a lot of discussion about how we were living in like a post-racial society in America, which obviously was not true because racism is rampant in America today, as we've seen over the course of this summer, that racism is obviously something that America needs to come to terms with and is, it seems, starting to come to terms with. But it's just interesting reading this book that I think was meant to shed light on kind of the falsification of this like idea of post-racial society in America. But since I'm reading it as a 2020 reader, all of the kind of realizations that are kind of being uncovered in this satire are things that I personally think of as like very obvious. So I'm not loving this for that reason. And also just satire in general is not my favorite. I was remembering, because I was reading some reviews this morning and people compare this to Kurt Vonnegut, that I read Kurt Vonnegut in high school and absolutely hated him. Like I remember everyone else in my class was like, this is so good. And I was like, this is awful. I hate this so much. So I think just satire in general is not really for me. I'm much more about kind of emotion-driven, poignant stories, and satire is, to me, the opposite of that. So not enjoying this one, but it's not because it's not doing what its intended project is supposed to do poorly. It's that its intended audience and its intended meaning and project is something that I don't care for at all. So I'm not really sure how I will rate this one because I am hating it. I'm not having a good time. But it's not a poorly written book for its audience and for its intended purpose, if that makes sense. So we'll see, but I do need to keep reading this because it's from my book club. So that one's fun. And then I don't know about my 2 Kindle books or my audiobook. I will kind of check in with those probably later in the day. So I'm about the same amount into them as I was yesterday. So that is kind of all of my updates for right now. I will check in with you in a little bit. So it is now close to 10 o'clock on Saturday evening. I did not update you at all for the rest of the afternoon, pretty much because I was reading for most of the afternoon. The hour is also why the lighting is kind of strange because my room is for some reason only lit on one side. I have like 2 overhead lights, but they are on half of the room and not on the other half of the room. And this is the darker corner of the room. So sorry if this particular clip is somewhat dark. But anyway, so I have finished 2 books since we last spoke. So the first book that I wanted to talk to you about was A Place for Us by Fatima, Farheen, and Mirza. And this one, I think kind of the love and praise that it got when it first came out, and then as it was making its way through the BookTube prize, as it made it to the finals of the BookTube prize last year, I think has kind of gotten to me in this one because I definitely had really high expectations, and I wouldn't quite say that those expectations were met. Granted, this is a really phenomenal debut novel. It is beautifully written. The characters are so fully realized and so fully fleshed out, and I think the kind of themes and explorations of particularly the Muslim identity in America, and especially a more devout Muslim family, in addition to the kind of immigrant experience in America and how a Muslim identity kind of complicates that immigrant experience, I felt was really well explored. But I think some of the kind of familial themes just didn't quite hit the right notes for me, particularly for like the first, I'd say about 300-ish pages of the book, and then the last 100 or so, like 85 pages, really kind of like enhanced those themes. And I think those last like 85-100 pages were 5 stars. I thought they were phenomenal, but I just wish that some of that had been, the kind of exploration of those themes that we saw in the last 100 pages had been spread more evenly throughout the narrative, if that makes sense. So this is a family saga that is following a Muslim family who come to California. The 2 parents are Indian, and the father has moved to America. He is an orphan. His parents died when he was a teenager, and so he's moved to America to have a job, and he has proposed to a young woman in India. So the man's name is Rafiq and the young woman's name is Layla, and so Layla comes to America and begins her marriage to Rafiq, having not really known him. It was an arranged marriage between the 2 of them, and they start a family that has 2 daughters and then a son who's the youngest of the family. And this novel basically follows their family saga from the kind of 1990s all the way until about the present-ish day of like 2016, 2018, and the familial trials and tribulations that happened throughout the course of their family. As I believe it says, let's see, yeah, so it does say, oh yeah, it happens at the beginning of the book. Sorry, as I said, it's 10 o'clock, so I'm kind of tired. But the novel also is primarily focused on the conflict of Amar, who is the youngest son, and his estrangement from the family. He left about 3 years prior to the eldest daughter's wedding, and then the novel opens with the eldest daughter's wedding, and Amar has returned to join the wedding, and we kind of periodically return to the wedding throughout the novel, as that's the kind of turning point for a lot of the narrative threads. So this kind of jumps back and forth through time, which was also something that I struggled with a bit because the jumps back and forth through time seemed somewhat unconnected, especially as they happened kind of within chapters. Additionally, there was also some kind of narrative shifts during a chapter, so often we would follow, in the first half or so of the book, we would follow Layla, the mother's perspective, then shortly after that we would follow Hadia's, who's the eldest daughter's perspective, and just kind of the switches between those 2 sometimes were not entirely clear to me why that was happening, and so I struggled a bit with that aspect of the story. But then, as I said, the last like 85-100 pages we transition again to the father Rafiq's perspective, and we follow him exclusively during the last section of the book, and the narrative voice, or the point of view, also switches to a second person. So Rafiq begins speaking to Amar, the youngest son, and during that point, that absolutely was like 5 stars, was beautifully rendered of thinking about forgiveness and the eternal love of family and kind of the remorse that family members feel when they have caused great harm to another member of the family. The last line of the book, I just had to like sit there for a minute and be like, whoa, this was a lot. But I just wish that kind of emotional rawness had been present for me, and I think it was present for other readers, so I would still definitely recommend this, but present for me in the earlier parts of the novel because I just missed that. I didn't feel quite as much of the kind of remorse and forgiveness and internal reflection happening in the first like 300 pages of the book in the characters as I did in that last section with the father. So that last section with the father also then felt very like intentionally meant to be about forgiveness and remorse and regret. So I don't know, I think just that kind of emotional changes for me did not work quite as well as it has worked for other people. So in the end, I said in my Goodreads review that for the first like 250-ish, 300 pages, I gave it 3 stars, but then the last 100, 85, 100 pages, I gave 5 stars. So I determined that a 3.75 was a solid rating, and I did like still really enjoy this book. I think the writing is beautiful. I'm very excited to see what Mirza does next, especially that this is her debut novel, and I think this is a phenomenal debut. It just, for me, some of the themes of forgiveness I just wish had been more fully explored through the entirety of the narrative as opposed to just right at the end during Rafiq's final perspective. So that was this one, but I still would really recommend it. I will also say too that it is almost 400 pages, but it also feels very kind of dense and verbose at times, and that also I think helped to hinder my enjoyment a little bit, is that it just felt like I was reading this book so slowly. Even though the chapters were only like 20 pages, they would take me like a whole couple hours of work to read. So that's something else about this book, is that it is a bit more of kind of an intensive reading experience and a slower read than necessarily some other literary fiction might be. So there's that one. Now moving on to one that I liked even less, and that was also due to the hype, which was Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered by Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark, who are the co-hosts of the My Favorite Murder podcast. This one was given to me on the recommendation of 2 of my closest like IRL friends who both love the My Favorite Murder podcast and know that I love to read, so they were like, oh, Jenny, you'll love this book. And unfortunately I didn't. I think that is due to several factors, the first of which being that I'm not a fan of this podcast, so the kind of love and appreciation that avid podcast listeners and fans of the podcast would have for these 2 women, I don't have. I didn't know who they were, and so that part of the narrative was kind of lacking for me. But additionally, I just am not a big fan of memoirs. I don't think I've talked about this much on my channel, but I just don't really like them. For some reason, I would much rather read a like fictionalized autobiographical novel of someone than read a memoir. It has to like really be something special for me to like memoirs, and I can't even think of one off the top of my head that I have really enjoyed. I guess one example would be like Wild by Cheryl Strait. I did enjoy, but that's because I have a external interest through hiking, long distance hiking trails. Like I think that kind of pull made me enjoy that book because I liked that aspect. And also Cheryl Strait is a very wise lady, and so she had a lot of interesting things to say. And she's also very reflective, which is something I like in memoirs. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble, so I'm gonna get back to this book. But yeah, in general, I don't really like memoirs, and this one really fell into all the traps that I like hate in memoirs, that are just like, my childhood was so sad and depressing, and now I went to therapy and I'm all better, which I just like, sure, like great. But I don't know what else to say to that. So then the other thing that I didn't really like about this book, that I don't usually like in books in general, is the kind of humorous aspects of it. Humor in books, just like, I laugh a lot, but I'm a very situational humor person in real life, and so on-page humor is really my like least effective form of like getting me to laugh and think something is funny. So it just usually doesn't work for me because, I don't know, my brain just like doesn't process on the page written jokes in the same way that it does like situational humor. So that was another thing about this book, that it's like meant to be funny, and I personally did not really find anything to be funny about it. But this also, just in terms of its kind of project of being a memoir about these 2 co-hosts of a podcast, to me, especially given that I've recently read Big Friendship, How We Keep Each Other Close, that I don't have right now because it's with my big friend, because she is reading it and she wanted to read my copy, but it kind of just felt like a watered down version of that, which to me had a lot more kind of universally applicable advice, and also advice that was rooted in counseling, psychology. Like they talked to other people aside from people personally involved in their lives about friendship and the kind of trials and tribulations they're in, whereas this one is literally just about like them talking about their personal issues that they're working through in terms of like anxiety and depression, and like what their therapists have helped them with, which is fine. Like, I'm glad that your therapists are helping you. It's just like this advice that's in this book is definitely not universally applicable, and some of which I actually like personally didn't even agree with. So that was another thing that I just didn't really jive with. And then last but not least, this book just did not feel very well written. I hate to say that because, you know, obviously it's very challenging to write a book, but I don't know, it just didn't really do it for me. It's a very informal like voice, and also it feels to me like a very singular authorial voice in this story, which is intriguing because the chapters are like split up. So I don't know how well you can see that, but they're split up so like each of the two ladies wrote one section of the chapter, so they should feel very distinct because theoretically they each wrote one section. But honestly, I could not tell them apart. Like, I don't know what happened to which lady because the sections just read so similarly to me. So that was also not very fun. I just like wasn't super enjoying that aspect of this. In general, unfortunately for me, this really just felt like as another reviewer put it, like this podcast has a fan base that was going to buy this book, and so an agent picked it up, sold it for a book deal, and then like had them write it. Like, it doesn't feel like it has, to me, that much more of a purpose than the kind of like you will make some money if you like write a book, which is sad, because if you want to write a book, you should like have a purpose for why you want to tell that story. And to me, this just didn't fully feel as purposeful as I wanted it to be, which, granted, my bar for memoirs and their purposefulness is like incredibly high. So like take my review of this book with a grain of salt, especially if you like this podcast, because as I said, I do not listen to this podcast, but I didn't really enjoy it. I will say though, there was one chapter that was called Don't Be an Effin' Lunatic that I did. That was the other thing. And I'll talk about this probably more once I talk about the Sellout more in depth, but I'm not a big cursor in my life. Like, I don't use foul language that much in my personal life. I just don't feel it serves me very well for most of my kind of life, and that may be because I've worked with children so much, especially like young elementary school age children, and so I've kind of monitored myself frequently enough in different jobs that I've had that I just don't need to do it in the rest of my life. But anyway, so I don't really use like curse words. I don't mind when other people use them. I think it's totally fine, but when it happens like again and again in books, it does grate on my nerves a little bit. And this book definitely is very curse word friendly, which I get that some people are like that way, but I personally am not. So wasn't a huge fan of that aspect either. But to that chapter, Don't Be an Effin' Lunatic, I did enjoy because it was actually like the most, I think, kind of introspective look at their experiences in therapy and like why therapy is important. And I thought that was really thought-provoking and interesting, and they had some kind of intriguing points about therapy and the importance of therapy. So liked that chapter, but the rest of the chapters, really, I could take them or leave them. They were pretty repetitive. They're about their childhoods that were pretty troubling, which I think is kind of, you know, a dime a dozen with memoirs these days. So yeah, was not really a fan of this one. I gave it 2.5 stars, but again, like, if you like this podcast, do not listen to what I have to say, because this was just like my personal experience with this book. So those are the two books I finished today. I haven't read any other books, or out of any of my other books, so I will just check in with you tomorrow once I've made some more progress in some books. It's very, I'm tired now. Okay, bye. Hi friends, so it is Monday afternoon. It's about 2 o'clock now. I didn't update you at all yesterday, although I did do some reading. Also went to a used bookstore here in Atlanta that I really like with my mom to pick up a book club book for her book club, as well as a couple of mysteries for her and another book, which I will be talking about next Sunday. So a couple days after this video goes up, because that'll be like my September book haul / like talking through some of my plans for kind of book buying in general in my life. But this was a bit of a cheat because I'm not planning on usually going to my used bookstore, because I can't help it because their prices are really good. But I didn't update you at all yesterday because I was kind of doing that, reading my book, chilling. We also went to a socially distanced birthday party for a neighbor of ours yesterday. It was like me and a bunch of parents of children who were in college, so loved that. I was by far, actually I wasn't the youngest person there because someone brought their high school age child, but I was the youngest like adult person there, which was fun. I had a good time. I was talking to one woman who has worked in education and is now working as a pod leader, so it was really fun to talk to her about kind of the whole pod like leading situation. I wanted to update you kind of on where my reading is right now. I am planning on reading just for the rest of the afternoon and hopefully potentially finishing some books today because I don't know, I won't have, you know, as much time during the work week to finish books. So that is kind of my update. The first update I will give you is that I only have about half an hour of listening time left to The Fascinators by Andrew Eliopulos. This one is still fine. The plot has definitely picked up substantially, but I still am not super loving it. It definitely reads kind of to me as like a younger YA, despite the fact that the characters are like seniors in high school. Like I would recommend this potentially even to like a middle school reader if they're reading kind of slightly above grade level. So yeah, that is kind of my take on The Fascinators right now, but I only have about, as I said, 30 minutes left. I'm like 90% of the way through that. Then I'm about 175 pages through the Sellout by Beatty. I read about, I think 75-ish pages yesterday. I'm enjoying this one slightly more. I think now that I like know that this genre is not something that I like, there are like occasionally moments that I find funny, but yeah, everything I said yesterday, or Saturday rather, about kind of the commentary it's making about living in like a post-racial America is just kind of like not really true anymore for a 2020 reader. So yeah, this one is still fine, but I am making my way through it. And then I also am about 30% of the way through Master of Poisons by Andrea Hairston. Still don't really understand what's going on, I'm gonna be honest. And I read some reviews yesterday because I was just like, what is happening? And it sounds like a lot of reviews are kind of talking about like the world building is, I mean, obviously it's very interesting. There's definitely a lot of inspiration from like post-colonial Africa, which is super fascinating, but it just doesn't make sense. Like she has not really, as one reviewer I think said something about like every time Hairston info dumps, you're really excited because you finally like understand anything of what is going on. Definitely how I feel. I'm pretty confused. So not loving that aspect of it for sure, but I think that is everything I want to update you on right now. But I am actually hoping to potentially finish Master of Poisons today. I think my Kindle says, let's see, it says I have 2.5 hours left of the book, which as I said, it's 2 o'clock. So I definitely think I can do that today. So that's gonna probably be my primary focus. And then also at some point today, finishing The Fascinators. So that's kind of my plan. I'll probably check in with you one more time before I close out this vlog, but I was also uploading the raw footage and like watching it back quickly yesterday, and I realized that the raw footage is already like 35 minutes, so this vlog is probably gonna be pretty long. So I think this will be my penultimate update, if you will. So I will check in with you in a little bit. Hi everyone, so it's about 8:30 on Monday evening, so I'm starting to get ready for bed since tomorrow is a school day and I have to get up nice and early. So I thought I would just kind of close out this vlog. Honestly, I don't really know where this weekend went. I feel like this happens every time you have like an extra day of the weekend, is that on a normal weekend you like get so much done over the course of the 2 days, but during a 3-day weekend you're like lounging about and then suddenly it's like 4 p.m. on Monday and you're like, wait, I have to go to work tomorrow. So if anyone knows the answer to that magic question, like please let me know down in the comment section below. But I figured I would just kind of close out this vlog. I don't have a ton to update you on since my last check-in earlier today, except that I did finish The Fascinators by Andrew Eliopulos. I just finished this just now as I was cooking dinner and then like lounging about after dinner, and I really don't have that much to say about this one. It was like very meh, 3-star book. Would not super recommend it, but just because there wasn't really anything that I thought it was doing really well or interesting, but there also wasn't anything that I particularly disliked about it, so 3 stars felt like a kind of fair average rating. And this one is a YA contemporary with some kind of magical elements, so in this world like magic exists. And there is a group of friends, one of whom is a gay teen, and he's our main character, Sam, and he kind of has feelings for another boy, which I didn't think was explored kind of in the best way personally. And they kind of get into some shenanigans with some people that are involved in like dark magic. So it's an intriguing story. I kind of had fun. I did like that it was set in Georgia, as all of you I'm sure know that's where I live. Although it didn't super feel like it was set in Georgia, there wasn't a ton of kind of indicators aside from the audiobook narrator used a southern accent. And the characters mentioned kind of going to a couple places like Atlanta. It was set in Augusta, or like a suburb of Augusta. I don't think Augusta even has suburbs, but it was a town outside of Augusta, Georgia, which is then like north. Oh my goodness, I never remember east versus west. It's in the northeast corner of Georgia, near South Carolina. And they also mentioned going to Savannah, which I did like. There was one element of like Savannah having kind of a more magic feeling, which if you've been to Savannah, well, it does have a lot of kind of tourist trappy things, and a lot of what's presented to visitors of Savannah is not kind of the entire picture of Savannah. It does have a pretty magical feel. Like you feel like if there was a supernatural place, Savannah is definitely one of those places where like the supernatural do exist. That and Hampton Court Palace, which is the like most haunted place by far, like in the entire Western world. Anyway, but I thought this one was fine. Would not super really recommend it. In fact, I just looked up Eliopulos because I was curious, one, if he grew up in Georgia, because I was not sure about that, and he did. He grew up in Noonan, Georgia, but also he works as a children's book editor in New York. I'm not sure which publishing house he works with, but I did almost think that this should have been a middle grade novel, and that some of the kind of themes of being different is okay, and accepting who you are even if it's not who would fit in your town, and that kind of being okay. I think if those themes had been kind of explored more heavily and heavy-handedly, I think this would have been an even better novel for kind of middle grade readers. And I do think it kind of reads on the younger end of YA, but it also was like seniors in high school. So yeah, I don't know. I think especially a lot of their kind of attitudes and mentalities to me read more as younger than potentially seniors in high school. But at the same time, seniors in high school are also very young sometimes. So yeah, that was my one kind of main thing, is that I do wish it had actually been a middle grade, and that he'd kind of included some of those more life lesson-y type things that you see predominantly in the middle grade genre, or age category, I guess it is. And so yeah, I'm interested if Eliopulos writes more, if he kind of digs more into the middle grade age category. This is not even editing Jenny. This is Jenny just from like 2 minutes after I finished the previous clip that you will continue to watch after I have inserted this one. But I was just looking up Andrew Eliopulos even more, which is not his given name. That is the last name. Either is a name he's taken on, or it's a pen name he's decided to write under, because that's what his little bio just said. But he's already written a middle grade novel. His debut novel was a middle grade novel that came out in 2016, which makes me even more mad that The Fascinators was not a middle grade novel, because it should have been. Like, he's, I'm sure, very good at writing middle grade, because he's got like the kind of themes and the vibes of middle grade, and yet he didn't write it. So kind of annoyed about that, because I really feel like this should have been a middle grade novel, as I think his writing style and his messaging may be better suited to that versus young adult. So that was kind of my main thing that I had to say about it. It was a pretty meh book, to be perfectly honest. So that was The Fascinators. And then I've read quite a fair amount of Andrea Hairston's Master of Poisons today. I'm at 54% of the way through, and I will probably read some more this evening. And as I said in earlier clips when I talked about this book, I don't know what's going on. I'm very confused. The world building is not being done in a way that I, as someone who, I almost need like my hand held when I read fantasy, because I don't get it. Like, I love reading fantasy. I love the creativity and the exploration of worlds, but I need everything explained to me like 5 times for me to understand anything of what's going on, which is why I do really like Robin Hobb, because it is a very understandable world, because it's very much based on medieval Europe, as like is traditional in the fantasy genre, and also it's so focused on the characters and their motivations and their feelings that are obviously based in the human experience, that I understand kind of what they're going through and like what they are feeling and why people do things. And that's kind of her main reason for writing her Realm of the Elderlings books. So those books I really enjoy because it is such an interesting kind of putting humans and their same experiences in a world that's very different than our own is kind of my favorite aspect of fantasy, or exploring history or different cultures in like more unique ways and kind of adding a magicness or you know, actual magic to the world is also something that I look for, which this one is definitely doing. It's well written, it's intriguing. I just don't know what's going on. Like, I'm so confused. Every character gets like name dropped in and I'm like, who is this person? I don't know. And then so I'm 54% of the way through. I barely have a grasp on the plot. Do not really understand the world because it's not being explained super well. So as someone who doesn't read a ton of fantasy but does enjoy it sometimes, I would not super recommend this one so far. But I think if you're a really avid fantasy reader, and this is something that may just be Tor as a publishing imprint too, is that since they, you know, exclusively publish fantasy and sci-fi, much of their catalog is this very kind of intense, like, you have to be a super fan of the genre to kind of get into a lot of their work that they publish. So that may also be the problem, is that since this is a Tor book, they're expecting the target audience to be avid fantasy readers, and I just am not. But at the same time, on NetGalley it says the, like, one of the marketing kind of strategies is to appeal to fans of like post-colonial literary fiction, which for me as a fan of post-colonial literary fiction, I don't see those comparisons, because this book thematically, at least right now halfway through, is not really doing it for me, and also I don't understand what's going on. But I also wanted to point out, and this is not meant to seem as like a overly simplified, like these two books are very different in terms of their plot, style, characters, but they both are generally marketed as like African inspired fantasy, and also are known for kind of having pretty intense world building. But I did just want to say that, like, when I read Black Leopard Red Wolf, which I knew would be kind of an intense project, and this one is, I'd say, much more on the like literary fantasy than Master of Poisons seems to be, but this one has a narrative structure wherein our narrator is telling us the story from the past, and he is giving us certain pieces of information at very specific times, which is one of the things that I loved about this book, is that it felt to me that Marlon James, through our narrator, was taking us on this story in the exact way that he wanted it to be told, which is in part what he's doing here, because this trilogy is telling the same story in 3 different perspectives. So I think that aspect of it really drew me in. It also helped me understand the world, because some of the things that I didn't understand at the time of like wherever I was in this book, I wasn't supposed to understand. Whereas with Master of Poisons, I think I'm supposed to understand what's happening, and I just don't. I don't know what's going on. So that's that one. I've really seriously thought about DNFing it, but I'm also intrigued, especially because there is some kind of like themes of environmentalism, and I'm hoping there'll be some interesting themes, since the post-colonial aspect is in the like marketing strategy of like colonialism and potentially another governing body in this world having caused the environmental degradation, but I have not quite fully seen that yet from what I've read and understood, which, as I've said numerous times, is very little. So maybe it's there and I'm just not seeing it. But I will be very intrigued to hear other people and their thoughts on this one. And then I've not read any more of the Sellout than I updated you previously, but I will read some more of it tonight. I did tell one of my friends who I do my book club with, I was like, spoiler alert, I'm not having a fun time, and she thought that was very funny. It sounds like, felt like her brain really had to be turned on to like understand what was happening in this book, which I would agree, except I don't want to turn my brain on, so I'm just not having a fun time. So yeah, those are kind of all my updates. I should get ready for bed now and kind of get settled into like reading a little bit and that kind of thing. But I think this is gonna wrap up this vlog. Sorry that I was like full force on Saturday and then just kind of slowly petered off from there. I did not intend for that to happen. But as I said earlier in this clip, like 3-day weekends, they just get to you. You are just lounging all weekend and then suddenly it's over. So love that. But I think that is everything. So if you've gotten to the end of this vlog, thank you. I know my vlogs are not the most popular thing that people watch, but I really enjoy doing them because I love to ramble like this. It's quite fun. And so I appreciate anyone who has gotten to the end of this vlog. If you have and are not somehow subscribed to me, hi, my name's Jenny. I'd love to have you stick around. Additionally, if any of these books or any of my thoughts or anything that I've talked about during this vlog at all is something you want to talk to me about down in the comment section below, I'd love for you to do so. I hope you have a great rest of your day whenever you're watching this, and I will talk to you next time.